supervising members of our Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. So I'm the manager of the Standardization Division, Ms. Deborah Souza Okufabri, who's a higher education administrator, Dr. Axel Kravatsky, who's the chair of our National Merit Committee for Governance of Organization, Ms. Andrea Primus, managing director of FHH Integrated Management Solutions, and Ms. Tricia Moonan, Finance Director at Caribbean Oceanic and Terrestrial Energy Equipment Limited. So thank you to all the participants for joining this webinar. I will be doing a brief overview of TTBS, but first we have the logistics of today's webinar. So today's session is being recorded and consent is required for your participation. So please click continue. You can use the chat to ask any questions, and please mute your microphone and turn off the video. The recording will be made available to all the registered participants, and you can indicate to the presenter whether the person is going too fast or too slow using the buttons available in Zoom. So I will highlight an overview of TTBS, and the purpose of today's webinar is to share knowledge and exchange perspectives on two draft international standards. The first being guidance on governance of organization, and the second on whistleblowing management systems. And we would like to collect all feedback on these draft standards by the 31st of July. This is our panel today. And going straight into the agenda, we have an overview of TTBS, an introduction of why these international standards for governance now. We will also focus on the ISO DIS 37000, as well as look at the structures for both standards on governance and whistleblowing management systems. And finally, we will conclude with how you can participate, and we encourage the submission of comments. To highlight the role of TTBS, we're the national standards body, and we operate under the Standards Act number 18 of 1997. We also have several other roles, including the National Quality Certifying Body, the Laboratory Accreditation Body, and we are also the National Measurement Institute under the Metrology Act number 18 of 2004. We have two critical guiding documents, our National Quality Policy and the National Standardization Strategy, documents that are available on our website. So we encourage you to participate and give us feedback on these documents. So we'll be hearing a lot about standardization today. And to recap the role of TTBS, we operate at 4 different levels. So today we are hearing about the international standards development process under ISO. We also participate in regional standardization via 2 organizations. First, I'll highlight CROSQ, which is the standards body for the CARICOM region. So the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, and COPANT, which is the Pan American Standards Commission. And of course, TTBS at the national level, being responsible for the development and maintenance of standards for the improvement of goods. So we look at product quality. We also look at industrial efficiency and development, and very critically, promoting public and industrial welfare and ensuring health, safety, and protection of the environment. So we are here to discuss 2 international standards that are being drafted. But what is a standard? There are some critical points that we have in terms of standardization. A standard is a document established by consensus. It has to be approved by a recognized body. And the essential characteristic is that it provides for common and repeated use. So standards can take several forms: guidelines, guidance documents, test methods, product specifications. So there are several different formats for standards, but it is critical to ensure that they can be used in a common and repeated way. Standards are a daily part of our everyday life, and anything grown, produced, and traded would be subject to standards. We have standards for electrical appliances, for ICT, vehicles, tires, and as well as the environmental aspect, sustainability. So we'll hear more about these aspects later on. At TTBS, we developed two main types of standards. The first being voluntary, and here standards are adopted at the discretion of business. So you may be familiar with the very popular ISO 9001, dealing with quality management, and also for environmental management systems, we have the ISO 14001. These standards can be used by businesses to improve performance. On the other hand, we also have compulsory standards which affect health, safety, or the environment. And these standards are enforceable by law by TTBS. At TTBS, we have developed a national standardization strategy, which includes the priority listing of standards to be developed over a 3-year period. This NSS, or National Standardization Strategy, was developed based on an international methodology. We would have collected data such as GDP, export, imports, and we also looked at policy documents from the government to identify where standards should be developed to support our socioeconomic development. There are several emerging areas of standardization, which are a bit different from the traditional focus on products. We are looking at issues such as sustainability. So a key aspect would be the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how standards can support the implementation and the achievement of these goals. So we have standards that focus on climate change, circular economy. This is a brand new area of activity for ISO, and we are participating in the process. There are also technical committees dealing with innovation, e-commerce, renewable energy, energy efficiency. And today we're highlighting the work of ISO in terms of governance of organization. And here, this is where we are looking at the 2 draft international standards. For a quick overview of international standardization, we are participating in ISO, and TTBS is the national member body for ISO. At the national level, we can play a very active role by participating in different technical committees. We have a voting obligation if we are P members, and P meaning participating members. We have the facility for experts to participate in international standardization, and also we are allowed to adopt and sell international standards. I would like to quickly highlight the role of ISO TC 309, Technical Committee 309. We are full member and we join 54 participating members, and we also have 22 observer members, all working towards the common objective of developing international standards for governance. And I'm also proud to announce that we have a twinning arrangement with a well-known international standards body, British Standards Institution, or BSI. And via a co-convenership for Working Group 1, we have Dr. Axel Kravatsky, who's the chair of our National Merit Committee, and he joins Dr. Victoria Hurt in co-convening and steering and leading the work of Working Group 1, with the focus being on the development of an international standard for governance of organization. So this is the end of my brief presentation, and I will now turn you over to Dr. Kravatsky to take you through the webinar today.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Sorry, I'm just gonna share my screen now and then invite Debbie Souza Okpofabri to present us an introduction to the first standard that we're gonna discuss today, the guidance for governance of organizations. Debbie?
Thank you, Axel. Good morning, everyone. In the TC 309 Strategic Business Plan, which was adopted in March 2018, it is written into this document that the primary purpose of good governance is to promote sound decision-making by leaders on behalf and for the benefit of the stakeholders to whom they owe legal and moral accountability. Now, you might be wondering, why now that this particular draft standard is being considered for national review and feedback? In the TC 309 Strategic Business Plan, and at the inception of the creation of the standard, 5 main changes were identified, which were seen as creating opportunities, constraints, and challenges. And these have to do with greater number of organizational types emerging in countries, state-owned enterprises, organizational needs, drawn, for example, through new expectations regarding purpose, scope, reach, etc., societal changes, expectations from employees, technological change that is taking place. All of these changes identified engaged a global conversation that attracted consideration for the development of a common international standard on governance. So why an ISO standard? Many stakeholders might think, well, I have heard or read up on good governance, and why create a new standard when there are so many available? For example, national codes, Institute of Directors, governance codes, etc. Why an ISO standard? Now, the answer is partly in the purpose of the ISO standard, which is to specify clear and unambiguous provision in order to help international trade and communication. To ensure that the relevance and needs of developing countries are taken into consideration, through 37,000 and the TC 309, developing countries, and like Nadita indicated, the National Merit Committee of Trinidad and Tobago was able to directly contribute to the work of the technical committee. And the twinning relationship Nadita spoke about allowed us, Trinidad and Tobago, to have opportunity for to build national capacity and collaboration and sharing of information. Now, there are 3 big reasons why the ISO standard is particularly relevant given its context. Firstly, it's applicable to all. Now, a review of comprehensive databases such as the European Corporate Governance Institute website, one would see that there are many countries with guidance standards related to governance, and mainly corporate governance. However, with further review, one would observe that these standards are sector and organizational specific. Now, when these existing and established standards are compared to the ISO standard on governance, the big difference stands out, as the ISO 37 standard is applicable to all countries, all sectors, and all types. Now, when we think of developing countries specifically, there are 3 factors to note. Firstly, developing countries have fewer relevant laws, codes, and standards to draw on, thereby making governance of organizations weaker, because the supporting frameworks within the context are weaker. Secondly, the pressure on organizations from corruption is perceived to be higher in developing countries. And thirdly, when we look at international trade and the ease of doing business, we would observe that developing countries have a greater developmental need as it pertains to institutional governance and compliance arrangements. Now, this is the end of my presentation, and I thank you for your attention. I will put you back on to Dr. Pravatsky, who will continue with the hierarchy of obligations impacting governance of organizations. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Debbie. So I just want to start off by with the hierarchy of obligations to put these standards into a little bit of more context in relation to all the other types of regulations, laws, and guidance and policies that exist. So at the highest level, we have international law, and that takes precedent. And if there's a discrepancy between a national law or national regulation, you can take it up and take it to an international court to inquire and discuss the international, whether it's consistent with international public law. Below the national laws and regulations, let's say, for example, we have the Companies Act and we have the central bank regulations as an example of a regulation. Below that, in terms of the hierarchy, you have codes for specific type of organizations or segments. So this would be, for example, the Trinidad and Tobago Corporate Governance Code from 2013, developed between the Corporate Governance Institute, the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, the Stock Exchange, and the Chamber, TTCIC. And so that gives precedent then to regulation. So there's a difference between the code and the central bank regulations, for example. Then the central bank regulations take precedent. And if there's a difference between the ISO standard and a code that is specifically agreed for a particular sector or segment, the code for that area basically takes precedent because it was developed specifically for a smaller or a more specific situation. And the general standard on good governance, for example, your internal organizational policies would be informed by these standards. So therefore, the main role of an ISO standard, for example, is to enable organizations to develop policies, approaches, or frameworks that enable them to apply sector-specific or national regulations. So it is not a competition, but it is rather an enabling and a complementary set. Now, in specific, as Debbie has mentioned, in developing countries, we have some specific issues. So at the national level, you would find much fewer regulation or even laws. So for example, this differs widely amongst countries. So for example, in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, you would find a lot more guidance as it relates to, for example, state-owned bodies or state bodies. So they have both for state-owned enterprises as well as public bodies. And you have regulations for the evaluation, for the composition of boards, for a lot of different aspects relating to governance, which you wouldn't have in our context. Or, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have basically one basic company law, Company Act of 1995. You would find that in other jurisdictions, let's say, for example, the UK or Germany or other countries, you would find a much larger variety of company or organizational forms in which you can incorporate, each with its specific specifications. Having those specifications is useful because it acts as a container and as a guide for organizations. But particularly as it relates to SMEs, for example, there are very few codes or guidance on these topics. So in Europe, for example, you have the European Confederation of Company Directors issued a guideline or a guide in 2010. And that is one of the very few documents that you would find specifically for small and medium enterprises. And a lot of the corporate governance recommendations that you would find, which, for example, specify that the board needs to be different from management, that it's good to have a separation, that is a requirement or a strong recommendation for good governance. That is definitely not the case for small and medium enterprises. It is not a necessity to have that separated to have good governance. And shareholders, for example, have a very important role to play. So there are other criteria that apply in order to have good governance, because the nature of the organizations is different, the risks they're facing is different, and so therefore the guidance should be appropriate for that type of organization. And now, having fewer of these sector codes, you would find that there are only 2 countries that at present have a standard relating to governance. And that one is Australia, which developed one in 2003, revised it in 2008, and is very active in participating and developing the ISO standard. And then you have the UK developing in 2013 and subsequently taking the leadership in convening this process. So, and the unique thing about these kind of standards, all ISO standards, is that they are applicable across all sectors, all types. And so therefore they become, as Debbie said, according to the mission of the ISO, it becomes an enabling platform through which organizations across countries, across sectors can collaborate and can communicate about what good governance means. So before we dive further and into today's discussions, I would like to invite you to a couple of polls. So the first one is, we'd like to know if you are currently using ISO standards or codes in your organization. And if you can click on the vote, we'll share with you the results of the poll as we move along. Okay, I'll give it another 10 seconds or so. All right. Thank you. So I'm bringing this poll to an end, and I'm sharing with you the results. So you can see that most organizations present are not using, but a significant number is using ISO standards. And so you would find that this is relevant in both situations and will help to explain that. The second, we'd like to invite you now to a second question as well. And in this question, we'd like to know what aspects of governance you're most interested in when you're reading this standard, for example, on governance, and then also on whistleblowing, but which aspects are you most interested in? And your answers then give us a sense as to where we might emphasize a little bit more today. Okay, so I'm going to bring this to a close now in 2-3 seconds. All right, so here we have two aspects. One is engaging stakeholders, and compliance are the two highest areas, but also responsibility, risk governance are also high, and fear on subsidiaries and shareholders. Oh, sorry, I haven't shared it with you yet. Now you can see it. Sorry, yes, here you can see it. I'll give you a couple of seconds to review it. All right, great. So we're going to be highlighting these aspects as we go along. Great, thank you. So to illustrate further, it's probably quite well known that, as Debbie has mentioned, that the Corruption Perception Index indicates that there's a high degree of perceived corruption. And many of us have been involved in many situations where these things have come about. And having a shared understanding of what good is. So it's easy in some ways to know what is wrong, but it is not so easy to say, well, what actually would be the right way of doing these things. And so that is what this is trying to do. And secondly, there are costs involved, and some people fear, oh, if I do this, others get an unfair advantage over me, and I'm the only one who is not engaging in corrupt behavior. But the one snippet of information here is that, for example, in the crisis of 2008, organizations in countries that had higher protection of minority shareholders were less strongly affected by the crisis than those where the protection was not as strong. So doing business in an environment people can trust one another is likely to be better. And standing out in an environment in which people have low trust in one another, and being able to demonstrate that one is reliable and able to perform consistently as a result of good governance is also likely to increase the value of the engagements that people have. And there are repeated studies for that. So particularly for longer term, particularly for crises, good governance, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that good governance pays off. But of course, in individual situations, somebody may, capture some value at the detriment of others through corruption. So at present, when you or anybody else is searching for what governance means and what is involved in it and what is the international consensus, the first place they would probably find is that they would go to the OECD guidelines, which were adopted in 2015 also by the G20. And so there, a total about 47 countries have been participating directly or indirectly in the process of establishing these guidelines. And they are specific to these countries, and it's a norm within these countries that is what we want to be held to and measured by. And particularly as it relates to state-owned enterprises, it provides a widely referenced standard because it is most specific about that, and these things are not frequently produced. Given the hierarchy that I explained earlier, the ISO standard, which involves at present 76 countries and 23 liaison organizations and has the potential to grow more, and at present 164 countries are reviewing these standards, these draft international standards. They are not there to replace the OECD guidelines, but they are to enable organizations to apply them, and also provide the means for organizations to whom the OECD guidelines apply, because they don't apply to every kind of organization, and enable those organizations to communicate and establish partnerships and trade with organizations across sectors, across types, and across jurisdictions. So it is therefore meant to be complementary and informed by one another. The third reason that Debbie has also mentioned is that a lot of organizations, and as you have demonstrated by those who have indicated in the poll, are using ISO standards. And at present, you wouldn't be using a guidance on governance, for example, because there isn't one at present. But there are 23,000 standards. And there are many popular ones, like, for example, 9001 or 14,000 or many others that people are using, organizations are using. And all of them make reference, not all of them, most of these and all the big ones are making reference to the role of top management, for example. And sometimes they also say governing body. But there is currently no specific guidance for that. So therefore, in order to correctly apply the management system standards or other existing standards, the policies that need to be developed in order to apply those need to come from the governing body, and or the governing body has an important role to play in it. And so therefore, having this guidance now is an important leverage to enable other ISO standards also to be used. So to help a little bit more to understand how this work is organized, that Nadita outlined in terms of technical committees and how decisions are being made. The characteristic of the ISO process is one of democratic, transparent, and consensus-based. And so in the technical committee, you have these currently 76 countries, either as participants and or observers, and they have some cross-sectional committees. And then the technical committee delegates some work to specific working groups in order to produce work products that are agreed amongst the whole committee. And once there is such an agreement, as it was established in 2017, then you start work in a working group. So working group 1 is on governance, 2 is on anti-bribery, 3 is on whistleblowing, 4 is on compliance, and we're currently working on a governance maturity, a new work item proposal, and on governance indicators. We're saying these things because it is helpful when you evaluate and review the existing draft international standards to understand that the work of the technical committee is indicated by this rectangle, and the green parts are elements that belong in the governance sphere, and the other colors are in the management sphere. And you see, therefore, that the Technical Committee on Governance includes both governance as well as management aspects, which is, of course, deliberate because it does contain and does span both areas. And at present, we are working on we're reviewing and working on the foundational standard. And there will be other standards developed, as I've already indicated, in the emerging groups. It could be, for example, sector-specific, or it could be on specific mechanisms. And there are other governance-related standards, for example, governance of IT, which is currently also being revised. But we have strong liaison between these between these committees and to drafting elements, so that there is alignment and governance of data and other areas. So today, the other standard we're looking on today is whistleblowing, and compliance, for example, was approved. The draft international standards about a month ago. So that is going to go forward and be published later in the year. So there will be more specific stuff. So when you are evaluating and commenting on the draft international standards, always have in mind that what does this standard, the foundation, have to have now in order for it to be a foundation? And it's a balance between being, on the one hand, it ought to be comprehensive, and on the other hand, it ought to be succinct. So as few words as possible, say as much as possible, make it applicable to everybody. So all words, all terms, all phrases must, make sure that they apply to an SME, to an unincorporated body, as well as to a multinational. Because otherwise, that shared basis of communication doesn't exist. Okay, so therefore, there are these three main reasons for the ISO standard. One, it's complementary, and it enables. Secondly, it provides a basis of comparison, and it is enabling organizations in cases where there is currently no guidance, and for example, for SMEs, and then also for at least SMEs in Trinidad and Tobago. There are countries that have specific codes or guidance on SMEs, but they're much more seldom. Okay. Andrea, did you make it back from another meeting? I think she might not be, but she's working on another, one of our colleagues is working on another technical committee, and she will join us as soon as she's done on that technical committee. So in the universe of standards, we have management system standards, which are, some are type A and type B, and then there are other types of standards, and they belong to guidance or requirement standards. And at present, we are working on, as it relates to the guidance for governance of organizations, we're working on, that is a guidance standard, okay? And the whistleblowing standard is a management system standard, but it's a type B management system standard, meaning that it has the same structure as all management system standards, but you cannot be certified against it. In the case of the guidance standard, it is also not, you can't also be certified against it, just like with most other corporate governance codes. Now, as mentioned, there will be other technical requirements, documents, other technical specification documents, and other products that can be developed later in the series. And so the point to emphasize here is that we're specifically seeking your guidance on what needs to be included here and what can be reserved for later. Now, where we are in the process of drafting and what stage are we at and what are you currently reviewing? So at present, you are reviewing a draft international standard. There's a 3-month balloting period, and which will come to an end at the end of August, beginning of September. And we're asking for your written feedback at the end of this month, so end of this week, so that next month we can collate all that information and come to a national position that we advise the TDBS, the National Mirror Committee, is bringing together, creating a proposed national position. And the TDBS then, in its authority, is then able to submit that as a national view and vote either to approve, not to approve, or approve with comments, not approve. And if you don't approve, you always have to give comments as well in terms of how it should be different. And so the process started in 2016, and for a year there was an international work on ad hoc group, in an ad hoc group to determine determine the desirability and feasibility of this work. And we joined at that stage in 2016. In 2017, then it was adopted as a formal process. And in 2019, it was agreed by the technical committee that it can be put forward as a draft international standard subject to 800 comments. And at this stage, we're a wider set of countries, 164 is being asked to vote, and all their comments will then be reviewed. And we anticipate about 5 months to resolve the comments. And then next year, we're moving forward to move to a final draft international standard, and can anticipate that it will be published by middle of next year, let's say. And then there's a systematic review process, which is also helpful, so that one can then see what needs to be changed, if it needs to be changed. And so these things will not lapse as it happens with other documents that are not as systematically governed as these. Okay. So when you are reviewing the standards, and also when throughout the course of the presentations today and the discussions, we invite you to have the following questions in mind. So one topic is, do you agree with the overall approach? So from a perspective of an SME or other organizations that you're a member of, does it make sense? And is the approach okay? Secondly, do you think that it needs more specific guidance on any specific elements at this stage? Okay. So which areas are unclear, or what else needs to be developed in order for it to be a comprehensive foundational standard? There may also be editorial aspects that you see, and you say, oh, this can be said much more succinctly, and take out all the fluff. This is what the essence is. And sometimes it's a word that you can collapse a whole paragraph through. And on the other hand, you may also say that we are practicing good governance, and this practice that we have, this standard doesn't reflect. And so therefore, it should be amended to reflect that. So if you have aspects that we are not in line with, and you may also say, oh, but this is not very clear. It sounds, the words are okay, but it's not clear what that actually means. And so therefore, what needs to be, where are areas of ambiguity that need to be clarified? And finally, you could say also, the other important aspect, of course, is that this is all about application. And so are there aspects about the standards that you say are a barrier, either because they're too difficult to adopt or too costly to adopt, and it just doesn't make sense for an SME or any other kind of organization that you may have intimate knowledge of to actually use it. And therefore, how else would you put it? What would be the alternative way of articulating something that is good governance and that you suggest? Okay, so we're now coming to the second part of this process. And here we're looking now at we're starting with the 37,000 ISO Draft International 37,000. And the basic structure of it is that you have an introduction, you have a scope of what is the scope, to whom does it apply, and what is it trying to address. Are there specific references? And here we're references, these are normative references. So these references, this section incorporates areas that you say, in order to apply this, you must also do that. And there are a few of those, if any. And then you have the terms. So in terms of terminology, it is the general rule, and as it relates to terminology, is you don't define aspects that are in a dictionary, but you define aspects in such ways that the words that are listed as the definition could be replaced within the text. So you can substitute the definition for the word in the text, and it must read okay, and then it's a decent definition. But particularly, let's say in governance, it's very important because most of the time, most presentations and discussions of governance means that, well, it all means different things to different people. And my favorite one is this. So in this case, then there is a clear proposal for what it is. And the context of the standard here, it's important for those users who are using already ISO standards that this is not about the context of the organization, which is normally clause 4 in a management system standard, but it is the context of the standard. So how does governance of an organization fit into the wider realm of other standards, other regulations, and organizations? And then there is this clause on the governing body, and then a framework is introduced that is both a map as well as a summary, a synthesis of what the essence of governance is. And then there are clause 7 includes 11 principles, which are brought together within the framework. So before we jump in to the details of this standard, I would like to invite you to one more poll. And here it would be great if we could know what your relation to governance is in your organization. Okay, I'm giving it a few more seconds, 10 more seconds. Okay, great. So the majority, sorry, let me share the results. So the majority of persons are the owners or the ones who are directing the organization and who can influence governance. Another large part is those that can influence it. And we also have participants who are able to give feedback and who are trying to get an overview of what it involves. So thank you for sharing this. I think one of the important messages within the standard is that governance is not the governing bodies, for example, boards of directors, do not have the monopoly on governance, but governance happens in a number of places in an organization. And so it's important to be clear, and hopefully the information is helpful. But it's also a question at this stage whether or not it applies to you, and whether it makes sense, whether it needs to be more clear, or so forth. Okay, so let's, as it relates to the first clause, introduction, it has the usual why, but also what it is about. And so it is about key principles and recommended best practices to guide governing body to meet the responsibilities. Okay. Now, interesting here is that it is best practice for governing bodies. And then it says that it is also for all those governed, and then it says those who govern the organization. And now it doesn't say governing body, because governance is not only about the governing body, but the governing body is accountable to ensure that all others are enabled in their governance activities. And so you see that you have managers and staff, you have governance practitioners, for example, corporate secretaries, and you have other interested stakeholders. So particularly also as it relates to stakeholders, this guidance standard is quite explicit and rich in its description and recommendations. So another aspect in the introduction that we draw your attention to is Table 1, which summarizes, brings together the benefits. Now, interesting here is that the benefits are grouped according to where they accrue primarily, but it is also cumulative. So there are benefits that you can link primarily to the organization. Then there are benefits that accrue primarily to owner stakeholders. And then there are benefits of good governance to other stakeholders. So in addition to the organizations and the owner stakeholders, there are also those. Now, interesting here, and looking forward to your feedback about it, whether it's clear, needs to be more, it's different, you experience other things, is that the unique thing is that it combines the description of governance practices. So it links specific governance practices to results or outcomes within the organization, and those to benefits. So the link between practice and benefits is made more elaborate and clear than is usually the case. And so that is something specific to look at. In the introduction, you also see that, as I mentioned, we have those who governed, and we draw your attention that this is then further elaborated, both in definitions, but also in the section subclause called threat of governance, which talks about the linkage between governance activities that include the owner stakeholders, the governing body, professionals, and managers inside the organizations as well. Okay, governance happens in several locations, and So having said this, the next section, what I would like to do is focus a little bit on the a perspective from the SMEs. Now, I indicated already the link to different bodies involved in governance, and one of the things that is new and unique in the standard, and that specific feedback is particularly important, is the terminology and introduction of the word governing groups, the notion of governing groups. So the governing body, which is accountable for the governance of the organization. So that is, let's say, for example, the board of directors. Sorry, my battery is running low. Which is accountable for the governance. For example, it could be the board of directors. Okay, so governing body could be that. but you also have owner stakeholders. So for example, this would be the shareholder assembly has a voice and makes decisions pertaining to governance through the shareholder assembly. And then you have also executive management, which is also involved. It may be, for example, governing specific units of the organization, but it is also involved in the normative aspects of the organization and governance at the organization as a whole. And then you may also have an advisory board, particularly for SMEs. It's one of the common and frequently used tools when owner governors, owner stakeholders choose to create a separation and are maybe don't introduce a fiduciary board, but just an advisory board. And so, but all of these bodies are part of the all governing groups. And the governance framework explains and creates a system by which these groups create work, duties, relationships, reporting, and how they make decisions. So I want to introduce Tricia now to help us take a more owner perspective now, for example, SME perspective, and illustrate some of these aspects. Tricia?
Thank you, Axel. So on the next slide, when we think of owners or owner stakeholders, there's normally a proportion in the elements when we talk about that. So somebody might own 1/4 of the company and somebody else might own 3/4. Or as in my case, I am the owner of an SME and my company is a micro company operating in the energy sector. We have 50-50 ownership between myself and my husband. So as owners, we play a certain role and our decision making is weighted based on the percentage ownership we hold. But as members of the governing body, so we are directors in the company also, everyone has an equal say around the table. And you can see a triangle there for executive management, and that's trying to depict that as our role as managers in the company, there is a hierarchical element to decision making. So I was asked to look at this draft standard and give my feedback. And I even interviewed the managing director of the company. And some of our thoughts, it was surprising to me how well articulated those thoughts are in this draft standard and how well they were addressed as core principles in this standard. So let me just give you some examples. The managing director, his feedback as owner, as an owner of the company, he said, as the owner, I have certain values I operate by, and I'm interested to put good governance practices in place once there is a fit. As the director, I'm focused on my company being seen as a good governance practitioner. And I'm not so concerned about what others are doing to get ahead, because at the end of the day, I need to sleep at night. And as the manager, the cost of putting good governance practice in place is a consideration for me, but it's not unlike any other cost of implementing any other management system. So to him, it wasn't prohibitive. And these points are addressed in this standard, so you would find that it's quite useful for you if you are a member or owner of an SME. From my perspective as a finance director, my thoughts were that as the owner of this SME, purpose for me is a personal thing. And the value system and the purpose of the company is founded on my personal value system. And for me as director, as a leader in the organization, I set the tone for the values, the ideals, and the culture. And I personally find that my examples are followed by others. And then in my role as a manager, and from a finance perspective, performance measurement is a must for me. and decision making based on facts, not feelings, is essential to making better, sounder, more robust decisions. So all this to say that throughout this draft international standard, I can find practical examples of how we at COTIL, that's the name of my company, how we have applied good governance principles, but I can also find areas of improvement and good ideas for me to implement from this draft international standard. So I am encouraging you to embrace it because it is relevant to you, no matter if your company has 1 employee and you are that employee, or it has 1,000 employees. It's all relevant to all types and all sizes of companies. So in the next slide, what we're trying to say is that in a family-owned SME in particular, the owner stakeholder, the governing body, and the executive management can in fact be one and the same person or sets of people. And they all play all the roles that we discussed. And this is articulated very robustly in the standard. So Axel, I'll pass it back to you here.
Okay. Great, thank you. That is, it's always, I find very, very helpful to put things into a practical application and into a reality, and to then also illustrate it graphically. so thank you, Tricia.
Hi, Axel. We have a question.
Yes.
Does the concept of SME include an organization where there's one owner/manager and all employees are unskilled workers?
Yes, I mean, it may be also micro. So there may be a difference between micro and small. And, you know, there is no currently agreed universal standard of what SME means. So maybe there should be a standard on that. But the most reasonable and considered opinion on this topic, I think, is that the size is dependent on turnover. And few organizations think in terms of, oh, how many employees do I have, in terms of saying what stage they're at. It's really about what is the stage to which they have grown, and turnover is usually sort of the used as the shorthand. But for micro organizations, it also applies. And yes, it's so that case where you are the owner, you are the governing body, and you are executive or management. Yeah, it's all in one person. And but you're still working. You have other people you work with. So basically, the way to know whether or not it applies to you is whether or not you're an organization. And the organization is also defined, and that is, it's an individual or a group of persons working towards a common goal. It's a better definition than that, but that's essentially what it says. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that question, and please don't hesitate to ask questions along the way. So let's look at the introduction, the final couple of slides on the introduction. The aim here is to have both qualitative dimensions. So you want to be able to, by applying the standards, it helps governing bodies to efficiently and effectively fulfill their duties, and thereby enhance trust, inclusion, accountability, responsiveness, and equity. So there are a number of qualitative dimensions to it. And what is usually not clear is, well, what is the outcome of this whole governance? Why do we do these things? And what is the end? What is the overall thing? So the outcomes of governance are proposed to be effective performance, responsible stewardship, and ethical behavior of the organization. Okay, so it is performing, it is responsible, and it is ethical. And those are the 3 outcomes of good governance. And to get there, it's all about decision making, and it's all about having confidence. And so it is the decisions of governing bodies and others involved in governance that they have made decisions that are responsible, that are accountable, that are fair, transparent, with probity, and informed. And they're informed by a number of things: so data, expectations, societal expectations and ethical expectations, compliance obligations, reporting, as well as the natural limitation and impacts of your actions. Okay, so this already indicates that the dimensions that are expected to be taken into account. And so it already indicates that it simply taking the owner perspective to say, well, it's my company, so therefore I feel so. That in itself wouldn't be, could not be the basis for good governance, because the organization is part of a larger context. It's part of society, and so therefore stakeholders and societal expectations, and not only laws but other compliance obligations, reporting, and also the natural environment are fundamental aspects that need to be taken into account, not only as resource use, but also what is the impact that I have on these resources. So when you Google governance and you say, click not text results, but image results, you don't find many examples for what governance is. But usually if you find something, then it is around a triangle, and it is a triangle involving shareholders who are giving capital, directors who are mediating a potential conflict between managers who are said to be self-interested and not working to the same objectives as the shareholders. And so that is, let's say, maybe a caricature, but you usually find that maybe that triangle. So an alternative is now presented in this standard, and by way of graphic representation. And here in this graphic representation, you see that we have on the outer circle, you have the outcomes, performance, responsible stewardship, and ethical behavior, and it's all driven at the center by the purpose of the organization. So every organization that is brought into life has a purpose. It has been created for a purpose, and this purpose is what gives it life, and through which you can also define what value means. So value can only be something that is aligned and consistent with the purpose of the organization. And once you understand how you generate value, and what value means, how it is generated, how it is distributed, and how it is sustained, then you can also have a strategy for the organization through which it generates the value and it fulfills its purpose. So, and its activity of generating value to fulfill its purpose through the strategies it has developed need to be also overseen in order to ensure that the purpose is actually fulfilled and this value is actually being generated within the constraints and according to the definitions of the purpose and the values. And the organization is embedded within a wider context. It has owner stakeholders as well as other stakeholders that need to be accounted to and need to be engaged. Now, these are the 5 foundational principles of governance. And you cannot fulfill these principles, these foundational principles, unless you are engaging stakeholders. So for example, since the value I'm generating involves others besides the organization itself, you must engage stakeholders, but it is not only owner stakeholders that need to be engaged, but other stakeholders as well. Not least because, for example, resources are drawn from and through others, as well as impacts are generated on others, and others have an interest in the organization. Then you also have this alignment, and this movement cannot come about unless there is leadership, because there are people involved in this process. And so leadership is a crucial enabling principle. And leadership is about change. It's about value being lived in order to create values, values being lived in order to create value. And core activity within leadership is decision making. And so decision making is based on data, information, knowledge, wisdom, insights, but also the process of just simply existing, particularly these days, is generating also data. And having generating data also brings with it responsibilities that need to be fulfilled. And the process of existing and seeking to generate value involves risk, and is, from a governance perspective, it's risk governance and not risk management that is required. And because we are embedded within society, social responsibility is a crucial element. And we need to look both at the sustainability of the organization, so the viability of the organizations and its existing or success over time. So these are the 11 principles that are now brought together in one sort of graphic illustration. And the core practices, foundational ones, are these 5, and the enabling ones are the green ones. So we are now moving then to the next section. After the introduction, we have terms and definitions. And the terms are grouped into 3 clusters or subclauses. One is governance, principles, and outcome and role-related terms. It's important particularly because this is a foundational standard. And so therefore, consistency with other standards is important, and others will be built on top of this. And so, sorry, I'm listening to the dogs barking here, and I hope they're not in trouble. Governance of organizations. So this is not presented like this in the standard. These bullets are not part of the standards. We just organized it here to illustrate this. So the definition is. So you see that the organization is defined in 3.1.3. It's a person or group of people. And then you have the system is not defined because that's a dictionary definition. It's a part that is, you can only understand by understanding its whole and the parts. Accountable is defined because there are quite a lot of languages in which accountability, the term itself, doesn't exist. And so, but it's an important notion within governance, and but it's also an important practice and principle within governance. And then we have organizational purpose, which is defined here as a term, and there's also a principle to it. So organizational purpose is the reason for which an organization exists, that guides its performance objectives and provides clear context for daily decision-making by relevant stakeholders. So in all ISO standards, you can assume that every word has been reviewed a few times. And so all words here are important. So the reason for existing, so it's foundational and it's absolutely fundamental. And it guides on the basis of which you can derive performance objectives. So if you didn't have that, then you couldn't really determine what your objectives are. But in addition to creating objectives and understanding where you're trying to go to, a clear organizational purpose also provides a clear, understandable context for daily decision-making by all relevant stakeholders. Okay, so that is including the governing body, management, staff, owner stakeholders, other stakeholders. They all should know, well, what is the purpose of the organization, and therefore, how do I behave in relation to it in order to fulfill its purpose? And you know, in many organizations, you will find that people just do without understanding exactly why. And those that have a clear understanding of the why are the most agile because they can adapt, since they always have the clear North Star, as it were, that you can adjust to any circumstance that comes about. So it's maybe not coincidental that now, in a time of great uncertainty and great changes, the purpose of organizations is coming to the forefront in many fields. For example, a couple of years ago, in the revised corporate governance standard in the code in the UK, but many other places. Then we have owner stakeholders. So owner stakeholders are organizations, could be owners, shareholders, or members of the organizations who have formal power to make decisions or have decision-making power that exceeds that of the governing body. So the governing body remains accountable, however, for everything about the organization, but the owner stakeholders have more power above them. And so, for example, to appoint them in many cases. So an important relationship. And the governing body is the person or group of people who have the ultimate accountability for the whole organization. So here, accountability, ultimate accountability and whole organization are particularly important because you're dealing with the whole organization. And when we deal with a question of subsidiaries, federated organizations, it becomes important to differentiate, is this a whole independent organization or is it a subcomponent? And also important that doesn't have to be a group of people, it could be a person, okay, which is to illustrate Trisha's point and others. Now here we're looking at governing group, and here a person or group of people who govern an organization, and then a number of explanations that try to bring out verbally the points that we illustrated earlier when Trisha spoke and the illustrations we gave there. So an important point to check to see how much it aligns. When we look at the context of this standard, here we have the different sections deal with the guidance, so that the need for the standard, and then governance organization is the system by which an organization is directed, overseen, and accountable to achieve its defined purpose. Okay, so you see that this definition of governance is different from the one that is frequently referred to, which was originally maybe inspired by Lord Cadbury in the Cadbury report, which speaks to a snippet of that is often quoted, and that is governance is about directing and controlling organizations. So here we are directing, overseeing, and accountable for achieving a defined purpose. Okay. It is also within the scope of these standards to make it clear that the governance and management are distinct, necessary, and complementary within organizations. Okay, so here we are highlighting another aspect of governance of organizations. And so we elaborated this part before. And then we're saying that at its foundation, so now it brings the foundational principles in, that is about setting the purpose, mission, vision, ethos, so values and purpose are very closely related, and that the purpose, the mission, the vision, values, and the culture give the organization direction. Okay, so altogether, that is what it is meant by giving direction. And then another foundational element is to steer, and you're steering the strategy, so the way to achieve the purpose, and you balance the resources appropriately to achieve that purpose. Okay, so steering has to do with the strategy and resources, and oversight to ensure performance and ensure compliance and viability. So you want to achieve your purpose, create that value while being compliant to your own values as well as externally imposed ones, as well as ensuring viability. So you're, for example, don't go bankrupt. And foundational is to engage with and account to stakeholders. And it's not only owner stakeholders, and also engagement is important. Okay, when we look at the thread of governance, we see that the governance performed through the governing body, owner stakeholders, management, and other internal functions of the organizations. Okay, so this is particularly easily seen within family businesses, whether small or large, where families and the owners have very important roles to fulfill, and are very clear that it is their accountability and their right to fulfill them. And state-owned enterprises is similar. And if, for example, the ministries to which they report, or let's say in Trinidad and Tobago, it could be Corporation Sole and or a line ministry, and there's particular staff. So if they are not fulfilling their own governance functions, the organization as a whole, its governance, its performance, its stewardship, and its ethical behavior will be come into risk. So it's clear at that level. And even if you are, for example, a conglomerate, and you have subsidiaries, or you're a bank and you have subsidiaries and all that, it is also very clear that there is governance happening within the organization. But also when you have just groups that are sufficiently distinct within the organization, for example, a strategic business unit that is operating in a very different context, there is important governance taking place within that organization. And the lower the governance functions can be fulfilled, the more agile and effective the organization is likely to be. So the thread of governance, therefore, is an important aspect that you don't find frequently in other documents. And your review here is particularly highly valued. And the result of all this is to empower staff to act appropriately and make the whole organization more resilient and agile. So frequently in SMEs and many other organizations, you know, there is always a question, how can I motivate staff? Why don't they make decisions? Why don't they take action when they see it and all that stuff? Well, you can draw it back to governance and the way the whole organization is working, the values of the organization, the ethos of the organization, and how that thread of governance is in operation. It's probably a root cause that you can look at. And here, in the section on governance and stakeholders, we'd like to draw to your attention that this standard is clear, that it is a clear departure from shareholder centricity, the notion that there is only one type of stakeholder that matters, but in fact, to articulate, to understand the purpose of the organization, it starts already at that point that you must engage stakeholders in order to understand your purpose. And then it is infused through all other areas as well. As it relates to the governing body, it is a feature of all organizations, but the question that we are asking you in particular to look at is, what can be said and what must be said at this stage of the draft beyond composition and structure and the competence of the governing body that applies to everybody and that is necessary? Okay, so then this clause 6 has to do with a framework, and the framework here is mapping the principles by number, but I've described it already before. And so now we can come to this section on the principles themselves. And here we have 11 principles, and they all have the same structure, namely a name, definition, the rationale, key aspects of practice, and then components of practice. So it is sort of getting deeper into subcomponents of the common principle. And 3 of the principles also contain dilemma examples, and 1 of the principles contains dilemma reconciliation process guidance. So let's look at the first principle, the purpose. And here it is: the governing body should ensure that the organizational purpose expresses its intention with respect to organization stakeholders, society, commons, and the natural environment. Okay. So purpose, intentions with regard to stakeholders, society, commons, and natural environment. So the second aspect to the purpose, it should ensure that the organizational values and culture are aligned to deliver the organizational purpose. So you cannot have purpose without values and culture, because it is the organization comes to life through the lived values, which is the culture, and that what you do, how the way the organization is, and what impacts it generates in terms of the value it creates and the impact it has on stakeholders, society, the commons, and the natural environment are all part of its purpose. And so therefore, it means that you must engage stakeholders in order to determine purpose. So let's look at a little bit at the clause relating to how you determine purpose. An organization purpose reflects core values that the organization brings to others and aligns to its core identity. So what value does the organization bring to others that is foundational to its core identity? And in determining the purpose, the organization needs to take into account existing documentation. So for example, you need to look at the articles of incorporation that often specify the objects of the organization or the constitution. And then you also need to look at the stakeholders and other relevant data sources. So for example, about the natural environment and so forth. Then you need to look at the groups that you seek to serve. So this may be members, it may be customers. And you need to look at what are the trends, what are the issues, for example, inclusion, discrimination, fair employment, natural environment, trends, COVID, other topics. And then on the basis of these, you can then create a balance between the associated benefits you're seeking to create and the anticipated risks. So it's important that none of the organizations, no organization in the world probably, has it at its purpose the destruction of value. Okay, but a lot of organizations are destroying value while creating value for a few. And so that is inconsistent with good governance. You have to look at what are all my impacts and to say, these benefits I'm generating are outweighed by these damage that I'm creating. And to become aware of it and to balance it is critical in that. So then on the basis of that definition and understanding, you can then derive, you can use the value generation principle, which says that the body should determine the organization's overarching value model. So the governing body should determine the overarching value model. So that means that the governing body needs to have a model of how value is being defined, created, delivered, and sustained over time. So what is value for us? What are the core ways in which we generate it? How is it delivered to the different stakeholder groups? And how do we sustain it over time? Critical elements without which, for example, risk governance makes no sense. Performance cannot be governed or measured. Strategies cannot be developed, and so forth. So it is a critical element. And strategy now, the third principle, says that the governing body is accountable for the organization's strategy. Usually management is responsible for developing it, but governing body is accountable for it. The governing body should direct the organization in accordance with its value generation model and then dynamically steer it. So you're accountable for it, and you are directing now, given your value model, and you are steering the strategy. Question is, how can you steer it without micromanaging? And there are 9 levers through which you may be able to do that. So there are governing policies, governance policies. So this is about how does the organization govern itself. For example, there is also a crucial governance policy. For example, the business ethics, your integrity policy, your ethics policy of the organization is just one of them. But it could be other ones, like, for example, your risk appetite, your whistleblowing process, and so forth. Secondly, it's the organizational ethos. And the easiest way to explain organizational ethos, shorthand is tone from the top, but more rigorously defined is ethos, in that it has a dictionary definition, and that it really speaks about the way the organization behaves. And frequently, when you ask an employee in an organization, how do you think the governing body would decide this? They have a pretty clear understanding as to how the board of directors, for example, would react with that, or react to that situation, or how it would decide. And all of that is the ethos, which is, let's say, for example, very crucial. Let's say, for example, in the case of Enron, they had a lot of policies, but the ethos was one which was not aligned with the policies, and where it was perfectly okay, and it was expected to take, to behave unethically, so inconsistent with the espoused values. It is also the decisions that are reserved for governing bodies, and that it could be a lot or it could be a little. So the more agile you want to be, the more you need to be able to delegate, and the less you need to have reserved. But so making decisions as to how that is governed is important. How you renew the governing body in terms of, for example, what competencies you develop allows the organization to move quicker or slower, and the values of your board members will reflect on what the organization can do or cannot do, and what it actually will do. And then how you evaluate it, your governing body. So if you are a team of stars, but you're not really working together as a team, then and you have no feedback mechanisms, then your performance will be lower, and you will be the constraining element to the organization. Succession planning of CEO and executive management team or other staff are absolutely crucial and determining the future of the organization. And how the executive team is, how you evaluate its performance, and the KPIs you set are absolutely crucial as well, and are an important lever through which you can steer the organizations, including their targets and KPIs, and compensation. So these are all measures. They are all direct and indirect ways in which the organization can strategically balance the organization without micromanaging. And so now if we look at oversight, the governing body should oversee the organization's performance and the application of the policies to ensure that it remains within the parameters, including laws, rules, and voluntary obligations. Now, there are 3 dimensions. One is the governing body's own competence, organizational capabilities. So the governing body needs to ensure that its own competence is up to the task. So, for example, there are, in the last financial crisis, there were many illustrations where boards of international banks said, well, the derivatives we have been trading in and working with are so complex that we simply don't understand what it is. So in that case, this is where it failed. But it also could have been an organizational capability was not there. So there are rogue traders or other people who do things which is beyond the capability of the organization. And of course, that can happen within SMEs as well. Finally, also, every organization needs to have an assurance process. That doesn't mean that you have to have separate internal auditors. If you are so small that you don't have such a department or such a unit, or the governing body itself needs to assure itself of its adherence of the organization or its own adherence to the organizational processes and policies it has adopted. So these are three aspects that are always within part of governance, of oversight. As it relates to accountability, the governing body should demonstrate its accountability for the organization and fulfill its duties in a manner which increases trust and transparency. So in the process, the reason you have accountability is to increase trust and transparency. And accountability derives directly, for example, from owners, stakeholders, or indirectly, for example, from society. And this section, this clause elaborates on these topics substantially. But unlike other guidance standards, for example, often you have stakeholder engagement, which is a crucial aspect of accountability, is usually combined with accountability, but in this standard, it has its own section because it is so crucial for accountability, for governance, and should ensure that the organization appropriately engage. Now, appropriately, then how do you determine appropriately? And that then also depends on understanding the material concerns of the different stakeholders that you have. And without engaging them, you would never know what it is. So therefore, you could not possibly have adequate accountability if you do not know what the concerns are. Now, for some people, they say, well, no, the only thing that matters is my owner stakeholders, the shareholders, and beyond that, it's really all optional. And, please go and get a, freedom of information request. But that is not consistent with good governance. So when it comes to leadership, now none of this would happen without leadership. And there are three main outcomes and three main features that are involved in leadership. On the one hand, the leadership needs to be aligned in its decision making, aligned in its values and the purpose of the organization. The behavior needs to be consistent, and it's not only the behavior that itself displays, which is crucial, but also the expectations of the behaviors of others. Okay, so frequently there's a difference between what people say, what they do, and then what they expect others to do. And some that needs to be coherent, and then the organization as a whole needs to be seen to follow the direction set. And again, that is a function of leadership, and it is not sufficient to believe internally that that is so, but the organization must be seen to be doing so. And so that is in order to be consistent with good governance. Okay, so now we're coming to data and decision making, and you have the pleasure of Tricia explaining this, and I will also step away to see what these dogs are barking.
Thank you, Axel, and good morning again, everyone. So as Axel mentioned before, the governing body is ultimately accountable for all aspects of the organization, and that includes the decisions made. So here, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the principle in the standard decisions in the standard. It's quite deep down. You may have lost your trend, so what I'm trying to do here is just give you a little perspective so that when you read it, it all comes together coherently for you. Every day, data is being generated, and the collating of this data transforms it to information. And it's this information that the delegates use to make decisions. So we make decisions on a day-to-day basis. We make decisions at an analytical level. We make decisions at a strategic level. We even make policy decisions. And each decision made is a reflection on the governing body. Now, what I just said is not specifically stated like that in the standard, but it's my way of giving you some perspective. So what the standard is saying is that the governing body should recognize data as a valuable resource for decision making by the organization and by others. And there are three highlighted points in the standard. The first one is that because the governing body is delegating its authority, decisions made by others within the organization should be based on trusted information. Secondly, when we think about decision making outside the organization, data takes on a whole different property. Outside the organization, data becomes valuable, and it's a valuable resource that can be traded. So it can be bought, sold, or even distributed. And therefore, this brings us to the third element, which is that this valuable data requires the appropriate treatment. And the standard is saying that the increased value of data brings with it a potential risk. And that is the risk that you will lose it or somehow inappropriately disseminate it. So let's think about maybe perhaps personal data, credit card information, upcoming trade activity, maybe product designs and formulas. This is information that you want to protect. So to summarize this section on data and decisions, the standard is saying that both the governing body and the organization recognizes data as a strategic asset or liability and is confidently seen to be using it well. As we go on to the next slide,
Hi, Tricia.
more propositions. Both are desirable. Can you give me a little feedback as to if you're hearing me? Because I see a note that you've lost me.
We had lost you before, but I think you're back now. So just from the start of this, just from the two areas.
Yes, so let's look at this example where the organization wants to reduce costs and increase the efficiency of employees. But to do that, they have to spend money on training and development. So both are desirable, but both are opposing to each other. On the one hand, we have cost reduction, and on the other, we have spending on training and development. And if we focus on any extreme over the other, we will not achieve the good results we're looking for in the manner we want to achieve it. So let's look at another example. On the one hand, we have the governing body needing to provide direction or instruction. And on the other, they need to empower their delegates to act on their own. Both are desirable, but both are opposing to each other. We can say that extreme direction can be seen as authoritarian, and extreme empowerment can give the delegates freedom to do anything you want. So they may end up going in different directions, doing things their own way, and that's not what you want to achieve. So the process of reconciling these two seemingly opposing alternatives enables the governing bodies to make more informed and robust decisions. So how do you reconcile the dilemma? Well, the standard is outlining that first you have to recognize that you have a dilemma. And then you consider the pros and cons of each. And while doing that, you consider how each perspective could support the other. You create and map out an action plan based on this, and you move forward. So here you're asking yourself, how can you increase the benefits of alternative A by using the positives of alternative B, or vice versa? And when you do that, you move towards a solution that reconciles the dilemma of two opposing desirable propositions. At this stage, everybody should be a lot happier with the reconciliation. So here I'll pass it back to Axel.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tricia. So it's a very important practice and skill of governing bodies and people involved in the governance of organizations to be able to reconcile dilemmas, as Tricia has outlined. Now, one area where these topics often also come up is in the governance of risk. And so the principle states that the governing body should lead the organization ethically and ensure that the organization identifies, assesses, treats, monitors, and communicates the nature and extent of the uncertainties the organization faces in the achievement of its strategic objectives. So we'd like to highlight here that this is ethical, is an important aspect. So that is in terms of societal expectation and its own espoused value or value framework. It is also important that it's about the uncertainties involved in achieving its strategic objectives. So the strategic objectives are an interpretation of the purpose and are future oriented. So this is what we are seeking to do. And so therefore, the governance of risk must be forward-looking and needs to be also communicated the nature and the extent of the uncertainty. And to whom do you communicate this? Well, to your stakeholders. And so why do you communicate it? That was said earlier, in order to increase trust and confidence. And so forward-looking risk assessments and risk communication and risk governance is an important element, and risk integration, the stakeholders, and the key aspects of practices are the other subclauses within this risk. Note also that this risk governance clause and principle complements ISO 31000, I believe it is, on risk management. So a useful element for is this compatibility of different standards, and for organization that reuses also transaction costs. Okay, the next principle is I'm going to speed up a little bit now because I see that we are really 15 minutes. Exercising social responsibility, and so it's ensure that the decisions are transparent and aligned with broader societal expectations. And so you have to articulate what these expectations are, and without engaging stakeholders, you wouldn't be able to. Key here is acting consistently and transparently in line with organizational values stakeholder and societal expectations. And this is about proactively creating sustainable well-being. And so, again, this is a crucial aspect, particularly in these times where the uncertainty is great and the impact of organizations important, both from employment, but also from environmental uses, pollution, assurance across organizations. So that the organization is not there to profit from the damage that it creates, okay? And so CSR is an important element, and it's foundational and crucial to the organization, but it is not a way of putting a plaster over something. It's really about, it's foundational to the organization because it ought not to create damage on the basis, that is not part of its purpose. If its purpose is to create value. And so therefore it's important, what are the societal expectations? And now this principle, which you defined under purpose. So now you're coming to how do we act on that and what are the processes by which we do that? More generally, the 11th principle, organizational viability and success over time, illustrated here also graphically, is that the governing body should ensure that the organization remains viable without compromising the ability of current and future generations to meet their needs. So we have two components. We have the organizational viability, the minimum of which would be liquidity and solvency. But it really should be, in the case of a profit organization, it should be profitably solving consumer or customer needs. And so therefore it is viable. And at the same time, it should ensure that the wider system relationship also remains viable and sustainable, so that others in this generation and future generations are also able to fulfill their needs. And so that is what is governed organizational viability over time. And so therefore, one of the implications here is that one must look at the implications for customers, communities, and as well as the natural environment. Okay, so then we're coming to the close of the ISO 37000. We have the annex, which has some sustainability practices. Do you have any questions here before we move over to the whistleblowing standard? Okay, so the whistleblowing standard is the draft international standard 37002. And what we are asking you here is we're inviting you to a quick poll to see how many of you are currently using a whistleblowing arrangement in your organization. Okay, I think the overall trend is pretty clear, and we can bring this poll to a close. And here are the results. So here most of the persons participating do not have a whistleblowing arrangement in their organization. Now, you will find this standard then particularly helpful, but those who have also good in terms of being able to cross-check and see whether your process meets all the criteria. Because in this, so the reason that this standard is particularly helpful and important also from a governance perspective is that we have seen that already at the definition of purpose, values is important. So therefore, if we want to ensure that the organization is in fact going that route, you would normally find any organization articulating in some form what its commitments are, and that is its ethics policy. And if you have committed your your commitments to your stakeholders, internal and external, by way of your ethics policy, there needs to be a way in which you actually live that. And one way in which the governing body needs to assure itself and being able to oversee it is there needs to be a process by which people raise their hand and say, well, I'm seeing something there. I believe that we are not doing what we have committed to. So that is the act of whistleblowing, or the risk of wrongdoing. And in order for that to work, we need to be able to establish a process, we need to implement it, we need to maintain it, and we need to be able to improve it. And the outcomes of something like this is that you would have more reports of potentially behavior that is inconsistent. The persons who are invited to report are more protected, because whistleblowing is, you're going against, is often frowned upon amongst others, and is often retaliated against. And but it is crucial for the organization and its achievement of its purpose. And you also want to be able to be sure that once people have undertaken the risk of reporting something, that there's actual action coming out of it, because that in itself is part of the protection. And then you want to be able to also have the improvement of the organization as a result of this risk-taking by individuals. So the process is, and the framework is illustrated like this in the standard, but because that slide is hard to see, we've organized it like this, where you have, as in all management system standards, you have the context of the organization, the scope that you then determine, and the expectations of stakeholders. That determines the scope of your system, of your whistleblowing management system, that the leadership commits to as by way of policy, assigning roles, responsibilities, and authorities, on the basis of which you can then make a plan that is matched by the adequate support, which you can then implement and check and act on any corrections that you may need to do. The result of which is what we have elaborated before. You're encouraging, you're supporting, you're ensuring action, and you're improving the organization. This guidance is giving you guidance. These guidelines give you guidance on receiving reports of wrongdoing, assessing these reports, addressing the reports, and concluding cases. And it has also a clear terminology. And when it comes to the context of the standard of your whistleblowing management system, by having assessed the context and determined the different types of ethical risks that you may be facing and different expectations, you can then decide what is included in your whistleblowing management system. So that is all the columns here. So you may decide, for example, this slider here is indicating that you could put personnel and workplace grievances within it, as well as external public whistleblowing. Or you can have it only internal. But if you leave it outside, then there need to be other organizational processes through which you cover that. And the role of the leadership, here we're highlighting only the role of the governing body. Of course, top management is also described. And frequently that alone is already a stumbling block within organizations to implement it, because it is not clear, well, what should the governing body do and what should the management do? And so this standard provides you that guidance. The governing body sets objectives, it monitors top management, it approves the policy, it demonstrates commitment, and it gives you guidance for how you can demonstrate that. You receive information and review it about the operation of the system, and you allocate and assign resources. And you exercise oversight. Now, let me highlight this part about receiving and reviewing information here. It is not that the governing body itself needs to receive the whistleblowing reports. That is a managerial function, but it itself needs to invariably review the information, like what type of information are we receiving, how is our system working, okay? So you need to have documented information on how the system is working and what the nature of the topics are, because that gives you an indication of risk, potentials, improvements, and so forth. Now, frequently, you also have the difficulty in actually writing such a policy. So here, you have 16 items that should be included in the policy, how to develop it, how to ensure compatibility, availability, communication, and the review process of the policy. Okay, so all very important and practical aspects that many organizations are struggling with. In terms of roles, responsibilities, it's important that they are assigned and communicated within the organization, that they have appropriate authorities, and that they can make that the delegations of function and decision making are also delegated. So alignment between what people are responsible for and being clear that we have people who are allocated, they have the appropriate resources, and they have the clear authorities to deal with what they are responsible for. And in the planning, it's important for ensuring the actions through which risks are addressed, the objectives, and that the objectives need to be set at the relevant functions and levels. So what are specific objectives at the different parts of the organizations? And amongst the, and planning also includes planning for the actions through which risks are addressed and opportunities handled. Now, what is the support system? And that includes resources, the right competence, training, personnel, leadership for the roles, communication, and documented information. All these together provide the appropriate support. The operation clause 8 of these guidelines are organized in sort of a process operational perspective, from receiving to assessing, addressing, and concluding whistleblowing reports. And to evaluate the performance, you look at the, you need to have indicators, sources of information, and then you audit that you are conforming to the organization's requirements, as well as this management system requirements, right? So you're looking, are we conforming to what we have assessed that we need, and are we also conforming to the management system? So that's what an internal audit function would do for you. And, or that's the internal audit function that needs to be fulfilled. And it is also in auditing that it has been effectively implemented and maintained. The performance evaluation is you need to review the management system in intervals to continue that, to ensure that it is continues to be suitable, adequate, and effective. And the outputs should then lead to continual improvement and to changes within the management system. And improvement relates to aspects that you are currently non-conforming with. So you're saying, okay, with these actions we need to correct in order for us to be conformant with our existing commitments. And continual improvement is, how do we move the goalposts? How do we improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness in order to be adequate in the future as well, or effective in the future as well? And what are the steps through which we get there? Okay, this was a 10 minutes overview of the whistleblowing management system standard. And but we invite any questions and clarifications that you might have. And
so Axel, there's one question.
Yeah.
Are there guidelines on the elements of a whistleblowing report, especially as the matter may end up in court?
I don't think it is not very, no, it's, honestly, I don't have the exact answer. please check. I don't think it is that specific. I think it gives you the general topics, but it is not how to make report. But I may be corrected, and we can check it, but I don't think so.
Okay, there's a second question. This suggests that the implementation of a whistleblowing policy is recommended for the organization. Is there a national whistleblower policy, and will there be inconsistencies in having one and not the other?
Yeah. So there are many domains in which there are standards as well as national regulations. And let's say, for example, environmental protection, electricity standards, there are many different topics where you have both. And in all cases, the ISO standard always gives way to national regulations. They take precedent. And in all cases, you will find the ISO standard enabling. So by doing this, you will be able to effectively also apply the national standard, because it takes such a wide range into account, but there will be specific elements to Trinidad and Tobago when they are adopted, and at present I don't think that they are, but with the procurement legislation and other laws that are being prepared and committed to, this will come and will become a major part for governing bodies. And I hope that answers this question.
Okay, so there's another question.
Yeah.
Well, maybe an update. There's a Whistleblower Protection Bill 2018, not sure if enacted. I believe that this one has not been enacted or proclaimed.
No, it's not. That's why it's a bill. But it is a very, very important topic, and particularly given the nature of the procurement legislation, it will be absolutely crucial, because at present, particularly in the public sector, the process by which these things are handled from a governance perspective reap of bad governance. So governing bodies will have to bigly adjust their processes. And so in order to do that, they need to add a real governance system. And so they will need both the governance, and they cannot achieve this unless they also do the governance part itself. So it will be a big change. Yeah.
So I think that's it in terms of
Great.
questions.
Well, then everybody will be super pleased to know that Tricia will tell us how you can participate in more detail. Tricia?
So, yes, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so thank you again. So what we're asking you to do is to submit your comments on the 2 draft international standards by the end of this month. That is July 31st, 2020. When you registered for the webinar, you would have received an email containing the links to the 2 draft standards and a link to download the comment form. Your completed comment form should be emailed to nadita.ramachala@ttbs.org.tt. As Axel had mentioned before, here are a few questions you can ask yourself when reviewing the standards. Do you agree with the approach? Is more guidance needed in any particular area? Are there any editorial improvements? Are there any areas where the draft standard is out of step with the guidelines that your organization follows? This is what the comment form looks like. And this is what a properly filled in comment form looks like. Make sure you quote the section number you are commenting on. So for example, I'm quoting on 3.2.8. Make a very clear comment. Give your suggestions for change, because if you don't, we won't be able to act on it. It will simply be noted. And give a reason for your comment. So for example, it's an editorial change, it's a change for consistency or other. And of course, don't forget to insert your name, company, and contact information at the top so that we could reach you if we need to. So at this stage, I'll hand it over to Axel. I think he has one more thing to do.
Yes, so one more invitation. If you can share with us how likely it is that you would be able to provide feedback on the standards. Okay, give it another 10 seconds or so. All right, great. Well, thank you so much. Here are the results of what people have said. And so we very much look forward to your comments, and also glad if you pass them on, and glad that you learned and it was informative. And I'll pass on to Nadita to close the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel. So I'd like to thank all the participants for today's session. I think we had a very useful session. There was just one last comment from Annalisa, and she highlighted the discussion that we need to have on competence and fit. And I think that is something that's absolutely critical for governance. So on that note, I'd like to thank all the participants, invite them to follow up with the written feedback so that we can have a further discussion. I'll make an announcement now about the focus group. We'd like to host a focus group session in early August so that we can deep dive into the specific clauses. So please join us for that. I'll be sending out an email later today. And I would like to thank our panelists, Axel, Debbie, Tricia, Andrea, for the series of presentations. So this concludes the 6th webinar, and we will now be moving on to the discussions at the National Mirror Committee level. So this is where feedback from all the participants would be absolutely instrumental in consolidating our national position on these 2 draft international standards. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone, and we'll be closing the session. So look out for some emails from me and the follow-up on that focus group session. So we invite everyone to participate, but we will be doing a deeper review of the draft requirements of the standards. So thank you, and Axel.
All right, thank you everybody, much appreciated.